Welcome to Imperfect Momming. Our children are constantly looking to us for examples. The term role model doesn't quite cut it here. We are shaping their worldview with every move we make. You see, it's not in the lectures we give or moments where we are actively attempting to teach them. It's in the micro movements we make, the unconscious ways in which we navigate life. We are constantly teaching our children how to show up for themselves, their friends, their future partners, and even their future children. So what can we do to ensure we are raising thoughtful, compassionate, self-aware human beings? We have to become them ourselves. No one is perfect, but we can still all be better, and it starts with self-healing. Let's get to it. Welcome back to Imperfect Momming, and we have a very special guest today, Amy Stone. Welcome to the podcast.
I am so happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me today.
Absolutely. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
All right. So my name is Amy Stone, which you already said, so I just repeated it. But my name is Amy Stone, and I am a life coach. I work with step parents and adults in blended families. I am a wife. I am a stepmom. I am a mom. I'm also a step grandparent. Like I just say grandma, but step grandparent. So those are some of the things that I am. And that's what I do.
Very cool. So I would imagine that as a step parent, that's how you got involved in being a coach for the blended families.
It is now. So my stepkids are grown. Okay. So they were 8 and 4 when I met them, 9 and 12 when we got married. And then I did not start coaching until they were adults. So I always share with people, I share all kinds of things with people. And there's a big part of my coaching practice, or the building of my coaching practice and my philosophy, which involved me going back to my husband and my stepkids and my kids and being like, hey, how do you remember this happening? Because the truth is, at the time, I wasn't documenting it or thinking, oh, someday I'll tell somebody this story, or, oh, gee, I'm so good at this. I was really just trying to make it from one moment to the next. And that's really one of the reasons I share freely so many of my ridiculous stories about foibles and mistakes that I now can see that I made.
Yeah. And we don't know that they're mistakes while we're making them, or we wouldn't be making them, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I just wrote that down. There's that famous quote from Maya Angelou: when you do the best you can, do the best you know, do as well as you can. Oh, see, it's so famous. I can't think how it goes, but it's like, do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, do better. Right. And one of the reasons, and I hope that anybody who's listening will forgive me for messing it up because I didn't get it exactly right, but one of the things that I love so much about that message is that for me, it gives me a way to be great, to give myself grace and compassion for the fact that I am not getting it right when I don't know better, so I couldn't have done any better. I didn't know any better, and you can't do any better until you know better. And so for me, I love that message. It's like, as long as you are open to always learning and improving, and you can be, because that's an important part of my being happy with my life, is just really honoring that the younger version of me didn't know all this stuff.
Yeah. And I've used that in coaching calls with clients where they were very upset with their own mom for not knowing the stuff that she just learned right now. And I'm like, so you're mad at her for not knowing what you just learned? When she didn't have access to the internet like you do?
It's really, our relationships with our parents are really complicated. And one of the things so I'm 48. And my dad passed away about 14 years ago, and my mom is, in her 80s. But one of the things that's so interesting to me is, as I hit the milestones that I can remember them hitting, my relationship with what happened and how they did things does change, right? So specifically watching kids become teenagers, because I can remember what I was like as a teenager. Like, I don't remember what I was like when I was 5 or 6, but I can remember what I was like when I was a teenager. I thought I was delightful. I was not, as it turns out. And I didn't realize that until I saw my stepkids and my kids go through their teenage years and see what a little twat I had been. But I just thought I was fine. I just totally thought I
Mhm.
was fine. And it made me want to do things like apologize to my parents, like go back and be like, oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, my son's in preteen land, and there's sometimes that he'll, gets the attitude, and most of the time I let it slide in a way that I nobody would have let it slide if I was the one with the attitude, but I understand that, the attitude comes from, he's in a bad mood, he's tired, he's frustrated with I've interrupted something, and I just gently remind him, like, hey, that's not how you talk to people, and especially
Right.
not your mom.
That's pretty good. That's pretty
Yeah.
good. I try and be patient with my teens. And each of the four kids has been a slightly different personality. The oldest was really challenging, and I knew the least. Then the youngest is also a boundary pusher. And the ones in between were a little bit more easygoing, but a lot of it depends on our mood, So if if I'm driving somewhere and I'm lost, I'm stressed and the radio's on and people are honking and whatever, and some teenager gives me attitude, I might just, with all the training in the world, I might be like, I, you know, um,
Mhm.
but then you can make up for it and move from there. It is very good when we can give them grace and allow them that space to be themselves. So he's a pre-teen. So
He's 10.
11,
He's 10.
10.
Yeah.
Oh, you were just starting. You were just
Mhm.
starting. You were just starting. It's
Yeah.
um it's a wild ride as a parent. And it's fun. It's definitely fun. All four of my kids have it's like they go through this bridge where they are simultaneously very small people, and they treasure. They want you to open their juice boxes and do things for them and cook their meals. And they also want to be treated like they're 25 years old. Like, oh, I should be able to go do this. And you're like, what planet are you on? That's not, you can't have both of these things.
Exactly. And this topic of blended families is, near to me and probably at least 50% of the people that listen, just
Yeah.
because of the divorce rate and whatnot. But I grew up with a blended family, and now I'm living in a blended family again. And it's, I look back fondly about how I behaved as well. It's funny
Yeah.
that you said that, and I was like, oh, if I look back fondly, was it not that good?
Oh yeah. I would love to go back and be able to see it through my parents' eyes. I really, really would, because and you'll have to, like, in 4 or 5 years, if your son begins to behave like you did, and it sort of mirrors back. Like, so I had several moments where so one of the earliest is a stepmom, because it is stronger, I will say, with my daughter and my son, because they look more like me feature wise.
Mhm.
But when I was newly married and my stepdaughter was 13, she had like a teenage meltdown where her grandparents were over for dinner and we wanted her to stay for dinner. This is not a highly controversial like family moment, right?
Mhm.
And she wanted to go do something with her friends, right? And as you may have had an experience like this as a teenager, like her social engagement, her desire, I don't even remember what she wanted to do. Let's say she wanted to go to the mall, right?
Mhm.
For her, it felt like it was the most important thing in the entire life is ending. You clearly hate me because you won't allow me to do this, right? And this became like World War III in our living room. And I remember at the time, actually, because I was younger and I had the distance from the situation because I was a stepmom, I remember trying to tell my husband, I would being like, hey, do you remember what this feels like when you're a teenager? It's really important. Like, I think we'd all rather she went to the mall instead of having World War III in our living room.
Right.
And still, though, at the same time, my husband was like, in it, now you've got to be here. And it just is like so wild to see it, because I can remember doing that with my father and be like, you clearly hate me. My life is over if I don't get to go to this thing. And it's so obviously not over. It's so obviously got over as an adult. It's so obviously not an important thing.
Right.
So it is a really, really wild thing to watch them behave and remember how we behaved and then just think it's one of those. I don't know. Do you like cringe comedy like The Office where they
Mhm.
tell the jokes that make you cringe? So I have trouble with that. I don't love it. Like I can see the humor, but I'll change the channel real quick because when I get that feeling of cringy, and that's what it's like to watch our kids like go through their adolescent years because it's like, oh gosh, don't do it. You know,
Yeah, I know
I
how
know you're
I
gonna
know
right.
how you feel, and it's not that big of a deal.
Exactly. I know you're gonna be miserable, but please do. Okay, you're gonna do it anyway. Go for it. You know, like that's exactly that's how it is.
Yeah. When
Yeah.
I was so my son has started sneaking stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and we catch him.
Yeah,
Otherwise
they're
we
not
wouldn't know
very
that he
good at it.
started. Yeah.
Yeah, they're not very good
Like,
at it. It's really funny.
yeah, I was like, we wouldn't know that he was doing it if we weren't catching him, obviously.
Right.
But so and he's homesick today, and on Tuesday, what's today? Thursday.
Today is Thursday.
On Wednesday morning, well, I think on Tuesday he said that he wasn't feeling good, and we sent him to school, and then on Wednesday he's like, it was more obvious that he wasn't feeling good, but I was still kind of drilling him like, are you, like, is there something that you're just not, telling it, like, is something going on? Are you just trying to avoid this? Like, what's going, and but I was like, okay, you can stay home, but no electronics. So
Right.
that just that was the real test.
That's always the test. You can stay home, but you can't sit on the couch. And if they're
Yeah,
like, okay.
okay,
Yeah.
fine, I'll go to school. No. So he ended up spiking a fever later. But we were when he spiked the fever, I said, hey, listen, I want you to understand every child on the existence of this planet has lied and said, I don't feel good in order to not go to school.
Oh,
So it's
yeah.
not that I don't believe you. It's that you have to deal with the fact that every other kid has told that lie, including you. Said he admitted that he had done it once too. And he said, well, you can just believe me. And I said, well, I believe you 95% of the time, but
Yeah.
5% of the time you do sneaky things. So I have to, balance it.
That's definitely one of the things. Like, I thought I was a very sneaky teenager and I got caught a lot. Right. I got caught a lot. And I didn't quite understand how my dad had been so good at catching me until I was an adult and I was like, oh my gosh, they're terrible at this. Like they're terrible at this. They're so much louder than they think they are. They're really bad liars when they start. They do get better. They do get better. And then there's a crazy point of adulting young adults where most of us go through a thing. It's like, well, I'm not sure I really want to know, exactly
Mm-hmm.
what's going on. So it's okay. That's your space. And I'm talking about older teenagers who are doing like adult things like 18, 19, 20. But it's like, okay, you're on your time with, whoever is your partner. I don't need to know all the details for that.
Mm-hmm.
And but yeah, I do. So when which one of the kids? There were a bunch of kids running around my house. I think they were about 9 years old. Really a time when you are trying to tell secrets, but you don't know what secrets are and you're not very good at being sneaky.
Mm-hmm.
And they weren't, and the things you're trying to get away with are not even often like, so stay home from school, that's a real thing. But sometimes at 9 and 10, they're trying to get away with stuff that's not even needing to be a secret. That's the funniest part of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this little group of boys, I forget who it was. Anyway, they were in the yard running around the house, but for some reason they were coming in and out of the house through a window instead of the door. And I remember I was like, what is going on? And so as a result of this, because I knew they were all there, I did not understand it, but there were leaves and dirt and stuff coming through the thing. And then one of them was like, wow, so and so is sneaking out the window. And I was like, he's not sneaking out the window because everybody knows he's going out the window. Like, what is this? It's the middle of the day. So, and I remember talking to this little group of boys and being like, here's the door. Please just use the door. Like, please stop with the window. I don't know. They're not very good at it.
Like, why do you feel the need to sneak around and like
Right.
just
Let's build
come
you
on
a
out?
secret
It's fine.
fort If you want to have
Right.
a secret, we'll build you. Leave the window out of it.
Right. I do remember as in the one time I got in, I really didn't get in trouble a lot in high school. Like my dad was a pastor, so there was the stereotype of you're either an angel or not. And
Yeah.
I knew I wasn't an angel, but I was really trying hard to be that, perfect child. And so I had agreed to babysit,
Okay.
and without realizing that a friend of mine had made plans with we had a group of like five of us, and this friend was insistent that I be there because I said I would be there. And so I thought, okay, well, I'll just find somebody else to babysit, and then problem solved. And that was a great idea. I just didn't tell the parents that I
Oh
found
gosh.
somebody else to
Yeah.
babysit.
Yeah.
And it was like this all day thing with church. And there was my dad was the associate pastor, so it was the senior pastor's kids and the music director's kids. And so they were
Yeah.
gone all day, and there was two different babysitting shifts, so the parents didn't know until they got home that this stranger was watching their kids. She was a teenager just like me, 16 years old or whatnot.
Yeah, they
So
probably were a little bit surprised.
I got in a lot of trouble for that. And at the time I didn't really understand the problem. As a parent, I understand the problem. I was like,
Yeah.
I covered the responsibility,
Yeah.
like, so that was like the biggest getting in trouble when I was a teenager. My
It's a really hard thing for kids, that thing about you have to tell people when you make changes, you have to communicate it. It's a really, really hard concept to deal with. And it's also one of those places where adults, including a lot of adults who should know, like teachers and counselors and coaches, they don't often catch where the mistake is. So they'll come down real hard with a consequence, and they won't say, like, so the really, really good adults in this situation, they'll start with a question like, hey, why did you do this? Like, what were you thinking? Like, what was going on? And then they give you a chance to do it. And they're like, oh, you know what? You should have told us, or you should have come and asked us first. Right. And then they go from that. And because it's just a total block on the kid's part. They're like, I solved the problem. Nobody will know. I've not done anything wrong. Why would anybody be upset? And then the adults are like, oh my gosh, how could you possibly ever, do this? This is ridiculous. We didn't know. It was a stranger. You never told anybody. And the kid is like, I don't understand. Like, what's going on? Like, why is everybody so mad?
mm-hmm. That was me.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I see. Yeah, no, I see it play out over and over and over again. And it also, adults do it to each other too. Like, so spouses will do it to each other. They'll be like, oh, I'm going to try and fix this without telling anybody there's a problem. It's like, okay, listen, if you forgot the chicken nuggets at the grocery store, maybe just say you forgot the chicken nuggets instead of trying to, like, make up some story or pretend it didn't happen. Or my personal favorite, you never asked me to get the chicken nuggets. I didn't do it,
Deflect the blame.
deflect, ignore.
Right. Yeah, humans are so interesting. And so what is it that you think, and this might be a really hard question to answer, but is there like a biggest mistake that happens inside a blended family?
Oh gosh. I don't know if I can do one. I mean, okay, so when I started this, I came up with a list of like 10 things that I thought that that I thought that I had probably learned over 20 years of being a blended family. So I usually start with the 10. But I'll try and give you one of the biggest. One of the biggest things that everything sort of came back to over and over again, that was a surprise over and over, is that when I was a new stepmom, first of all, I always admit, like, I was what we call a child-free stepmom. I didn't have kids, so I seriously did not know anything about children. I thought I
Mm.
did based on being a kid, and I was wrong. I was wrong about that. I was really, really wrong, and I didn't know it. But one of the things that just surprised me over and over again is how I always would think that this was somebody else's doing, right? Like, so, like, if there was unhappiness in my life, it was because of the way the ex-wife was behaving, and actually I should say, like, I'm pretty lucky when it comes to my husband's ex-wife. So like, but it, or the kids, if the kids would behave better, if they would be quieter, if they would eat more vegetables, whatever was on my mind at the time. Or, my mother-in-law or whatever it was, that it was always if somebody else did something, that then I would be better off. And time after time after time, maybe I'm really stubborn, maybe I'm a very slow learner. It always has come back to understanding how I'm motivated, understanding how I'm experiencing things, learning more about myself and how I am interacting with the world and my family and how I want to. Um, and every time I would do that, every time when I would, be like, oh, okay, fine, fine, it's on me. What do I want to do? Then things would get better. And I've had to learn that. I probably am still learning it in lots of different ways. But so that would be one thing, if that's a thing I can share.
The interesting thing about that is that we do that with just about everything in our lives, where we, like, personal responsibility is like this 4-letter word.
Yeah.
And but when I was introduced, because it's very like, children are very much like, that person's at fault, because if they would be different, then I would be fine.
That's right.
And so it's
If you
something
would
that we
just
don't.
stop crying, then I would feel better.
Yeah.
Which
And
actually sometimes is true. Like, I'm just
just,
going to say this. Sometimes when the baby stops crying, you're just like, oh my God, thank you.
right. But it's very, it is kind of a childish thought process that we don't really grow out of, where it's everybody else's fault for how I'm feeling. And
Yeah.
we use it on, it's in our language, it's in everything. But when I learned the concept of personal responsibility, there was so much freedom inside. This is my
Yeah.
part of this situation.
Yeah.
And
First, though, did it scare you a little bit? Like, sometimes sometimes when people begin to think about personal responsibility, it can feel like a really heavy thing. Like, oh, is it all on me then? Like, am I the only one? Like, it can feel like a really, really heavy thing.
mm-hmm,
And then as you step through it and you realize, you're like, oh, well, wait a minute.
yeah,
If I'm only in charge of me, then that means all this other stuff is like totally not my job.
mm-hmm,
Totally not my job. And you can back off, and and there are big words that people put on that, like disengagement and detachment, and it's hard.
mm-hmm.
It's hard, especially parenting with kids and step parenting with kids, because it is in our space. It's very hard to be in a very messy situation and be like, okay, the only thing I can do right now is what I can do.
Yeah, and I'm definitely not perfect at the personal responsibility, because a lot of times my first thought is, oh, he's getting that from his dad.
Yeah, no,
But
yeah.
you know,
And the
it,
more serious things that are going on, the harder it can be. Like, it's definitely an instinct. If the kid is just, making up a little story or whatever, that's going to pass, or wants to go to the mall and is upset. But the more serious things that can happen in families, like, you know, big level conflict. And we do see these in blended families. There is, so I know you were a part of blended family and you're a part of blended family now. There's often a reason that the earlier marriage or partnership didn't stay together. Right. And sometimes those can be very, very serious things. And so those cause very, very serious, like, conflict in the family, like high level conflict. And a lot of times, if you're a genuine, nurturing, loving person, you will have a reaction that you're like, what needs to happen here is I need to buckle down and fix this. Like, I need to hustle and get involved. And if I can just do all the work, then I can fix this situation. And that is a road to burnout.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was fortunate enough in my growing up that both my dad and mom, I don't ever remember them fighting in front of us. If they fought, I have no idea. My mom was always very diligent about making sure that we sent Father's Day cards and birthday cards, and that we did, and they had an arrangement that was very fair of this. We get,
if you get us on Thanksgiving, then we get you on Christmas. And it was
Okay,
just,
good.
there was a lot of just respect inside the relationships.
That's really good.
And I would imagine kind of rare. Um, and
Hopefully
I've
not, but
oh, I I just know that I felt blessed.
oh yeah.
Other stories of
Yeah.
families and splitting up, and I've never been a step parent to a child that lived in the home.
Yeah.
So I don't really know the struggle of being a stepmom and being the other parent
Right.
that's not the parent.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I have tremendous amount of respect for my boyfriend who's, stepped into that role, and for anyone that steps into that role. Because I did date someone where he had, half 50% custody of his daughter, and it was really difficult to care about a child that I didn't really have a say in
Yes.
her life. And I disagreed with so many things that I was like, I can't stay in the relationship. It's too difficult to be in. And I mean, she was a 5-year-old little girl that wasn't in school and barely spoke. And
Yeah.
like
I
education
think
is
that is
super important to
yeah.
me.
I think that probably, if you were to survey, and I don't know that there's any data on this, but my guess would be that if you were to survey step parents, specifically stepmoms, that what you just described is probably the number one thing that people experience. So the frustration of feeling deeply for a small child who you have affection for, and yet being in a role where you don't have decision authority and final authority about things that you think are important.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really tough thing in part because you're in the house, because there are lots of other people who have that similar situation. And this is where I looked to for resources when I started saying, okay, if I want to teach this, who really knows how to do this? But teachers go through this where they have kids in their classroom that they care about, but they can't actually impact anything that's happening at the house. Social workers, definitely, guardians, nurses, things like that. Anybody who's working as a caretaker, right? Adoptive parents, that's one of the best resources for this, right? Because they foster parents where it's a temporary situation, right? So there are people who advise on how to compartmentalize and set up the boundaries in the lanes so that you can do it if you so desire, right? And
Yeah.
also on the flip side, to make the decision like you did, where it's like, hey, this is important to me and this is not okay with me. And so it's not a
Yeah.
relationship for me. But yeah, we call that so the difference in parenting styles and priorities. So
Mm-hmm.
like, so yours is like education, not having a 5-year-old in school. That's something that you would hope you didn't see very often, but a very common one is the priority of homework in early education,
Mm-hmm.
which some people just don't prioritize. Like, so you might really have somebody who's like, no, I don't want to do homework in kindergarten. And another person is like, no, homework needs to be done every day, 4 o'clock right after school. And that can turn into a pretty big fight between parents and co-parents. Or another one is bedtime, right? Sometimes step parents or parents that are part-time custodian custody where they're more likely to be lenient on bedtime because they feel like I only get these hours. I only
Mm-hmm.
get these hours, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the other person, for any variety of reason might be very, strict on bedtimes. I always thought I would be a very forgiving parent on bedtimes because I had always wanted to stay up later as a child. And it turned out that that was not the case. I ran a very tight ship with a routine. It was like, all right, it is 5:30. That means it in the bath. Here we go.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because, my son's bedtime was 8 o'clock or whatever it was at the time. And when he would go to his dad's house, it was always on vacation, where he'd have a whole week with him and no school and whatnot. And so, um, I remember one time where he said to our son, like, don't tell mom that I let you stay up as late as you want, or I let you stay up till 10 or whatever the thing was. And I was significantly more upset by don't tell mom than I was by whatever the bedtime was. Because I believe my house, my rules, your house, your rules. And that's fine. There's lots of things that he did that I didn't agree with, but it's his house, and it's not enough. If it was every weekend, maybe I would want to, invest in having a conversation about like, hey, let's kind of be on the same page here. But because it was, mostly on vacations, it wasn't that big of a deal. Like, yeah, you get dad's house is the fun place. Like you get to do some more fun things over there. And
that sounds like the thing that I try and tell people is I say, respect the previous relationship. I actually sometimes use the word honor, which is like just honor that there's, somebody else, and honor that they've got their own priorities and preferences. Right. So sometimes, and this would, so I have no idea why your husband didn't want you to know. Right. But sometimes it can be helpful to be like, why would he have done it? So like, cause you weren't going to care. You weren't going to make a scene out of it, but maybe he was apprehensive that he didn't want to have the fight with you.
I'm sure he thought that I would be more of a stickler because he had bedtime at my house. And
Exactly. And now, did your son at the time, did he think it was fantastic that he had a secret?
I mean, he came home and told me, so
yeah. We used to, so with our stepkids, I remember there was a time where they started playing the parents against each other, my husband and his ex-wife. And so there was a whole united family thing where it was like, we were making a point to tell everybody that everybody knew all the data. And they were like surprised. They were like, you talked to mom? That's a thing that happens, and it was really funny. So there's a bunch of ways to do that. You don't want, but there are also, and luckily that was about something that you were pretty reasonable about, because sometimes there are really destructive things that parents are trying to keep from the other house. And there are safety issues and safety concerns. And one of the things that does make that really complicated is what you said. Like when it is happening in another house where you don't live and you are not in charge, there really, really is a point where it's like, wow, I can't actually do anything about this. Like, and that can be a really scary place to be.
Yeah, that is very frustrating when, at least from my perspective, as the step parent, where I didn't have any control of
None.
the rules and what was happening. And if she and I had had a better relationship, I might have approached it. Who I am now, if that was a relationship that I wanted to continue, would have had that conversation. But it's a difficult situation to be in. And this summer we had a situation where I'm carrying twins as a surrogate. And
wow. That's exciting.
Yeah, it's has its moments of being fun and other moments where it's not. And but early in summer, June and July, I spent like a month in bed because nausea was so amazing. And my son got into full day night reversal because I wasn't making sure he was in bed, and we didn't care if he took his phone home to bed with him. And so I learned that he was in day night reversal when I woke up at 5 one morning. He goes, "Hi, Mom." And I'm like, what? Oh, okay. And then he slept all day. So he was going to go to a week to spend with his dad, and then he was going to come home from that week to go to camp. And he can't be in day night reversal when he's at camp.
Right.
And so I, sent his dad a text, and I said, I don't want to tell you what to do with him while he's there. However, he's going from your house to camp, and he's currently in day night reversal. So it would be beneficial to him if you would help get him back on track, to be regular, sleeping regular. And he said, "Oh, not a problem. There's no way he can sleep through the day. Like we work and, blah, blah, blah." So it was nice to have this co-parenting moment that was drama free.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good.
Yeah.
So the co-parenting, you know, obviously that we use that to refer to like when you're doing parenting things with a parent you're no longer connected to through marriage or whatever. But I like to think of it as just parenting, right? Like, you know, it's people parenting together, because those same things can happen in a house when everybody's still married and still live there, right? Like, so, and it's just parenting. We don't magically agree with each other because we live in the same house.
Touche.
Wouldn't it be nice if we did?
It would be so amazing. Yeah.
Yes.
Very good point. And I want to have like a 15-hour conversation with you about this, because I think that there's so much information about you know, the blended families, and that we don't have a lot of resources.
I know.
Okay,
That's
I was
the
going to
thing
say I
that
haven't done any
sucks.
research.
No. It's absolutely so. And like I said, like I proceeded into being a stepmom, not knowing anything about what I was doing. My parents were divorced, so I didn't think much about it. I didn't have a lot of prejudgment about it, which turns out to be lucky, right? Because that is a block where some people come into it with like some preconceived notions of it being wrong or unnatural. And I didn't actually have those, although they're really, really common. I just mostly was clueless. And I fumbled my way through taking whatever resources I could get. And I am a researcher by nature. So people would give me one little book and I would go through and read all of the other books. I really thought that if I learned enough, I would be able to do it right. Which doesn't turn out to be true. But there aren't very many resources. So it is a really, really interesting thing, because you mentioned that we estimate that 50 to 70% of kids in the United States have some sort of blend in their family. And there's a billion different reasons. Like, you know, it can be divorce. People can be widowed. Parents may never have been married, you know, like there's a bunch of different reasons this happens, right? It's like totally not an unusual thing. And yet, when you look at resources for families and children, if you go to the bookstore and you look at families, it's all about like, you know, first time marriages and first time kids and, you know, in little tiny young children. There are no books, very, very few books that are for step parents and people who are there's divorce books. There's like a whole section of divorce books. There's like an unbelievable amount of resources. And the resources that are there are very, very problem driven. There's a book out there that's called Step Monster, I think is what it's called, although I might be wrong about that. In the first couple of pages of this book, which I did not read, thank God, while I was a new stepmom, it says that being a step parent is the perfect storm for clinical depression. This is in the opening pages. And I'm like, oh my God, thank God somebody didn't tell me that when I was a new stepmom. I would have gone running out the door.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it's really, really interesting. I did back to school season, right? You don't ever see a Target commercial that's like, hey, you may want to buy 2 backpacks so that you don't have to fight about this for 9 months. You may want to buy 2 ice packs for the lunchbox so that everybody has one. That's not on any school supply list anywhere, and it impacts half the families of the world. It's a really interesting thing that we don't offer more support for the parents who are going through this.
So when is your book coming out?
I don't know. That's a really like what I like. I have to calm down so I'm not so ranty before I do it.
Hey, sometimes the best books come from rant, like just like, and then rein it in.
Maybe we'll see. We will totally see. It's like I love the idea of writing a book, but then when I think about it, I'm like, ooh, that's a really big project. So
I'm a writer by nature, so that's like my first thought process is like, okay, if there is no book, like, and I have the thoughts on it, like, then let me do the book. So I am writing a book about surrogacy, because from the surrogate's perspective, because from what I've seen is there's only surrogate books from the parents' perspective.
Oh, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
I'm like, well, I've done it 4 times. I think I'm an expert.
I think so. I really have no information about that, but I wonder, I mean, do people do it a lot? Like, is it something that people will repeat? Like once a person who is a successful surrogate would tend to do it more than once?
I'd say it depends on the experience they have.
Depends on the experience. That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yep.
I was not a big fan of being pregnant. So it would like if somebody had said, do you want to do this? I would be like, no. But
Let me tell you all the reasons that's not happening.
right. That would have been my answer. I would have been like, ooh, that sounds like a lot of
Yeah.
fun, actually. So I'm gonna let you take that offer to somebody else.
Right. And I was like ready to do it even before I had kids, which is harder. But
yeah, I can
I didn't
imagine
have the
that.
opportunity. So
Yeah.
is there a piece of advice that you want to share with moms?
So the piece of advice that I would share with moms is, and we've touched on so many great things today, and I know that so the piece of my advice that I would share with moms all the time is to be forgiving with yourself that it's okay when you don't know things, right? Like, so we have this like amazing amount of pressure that we magically are supposed to know these things, and yet there are billions of times in the adulting journey where I have realized, I mean, I have not been keeping track, so, but just like billions and billions, where I realized that I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. And we're all going through that. And it's terrifying to realize, but it's also very freeing because with the second you like allow yourself to be like, geez, I do not know how to do this math problem. And I've never seen this book. That's when you can be like, all right, well, what are my choices then? Like what can I do next?
And now there's so many resources
Yes.
that we have available to us that, when my boyfriend and I talk about, how there's no, there's our sick kid. When my boyfriend and I talk about how there is no, thank you, sweetheart. There's no parenting book. There's no manual.
There's no manual.
The kid. He's like, yeah, but there's like 68,000 parenting books. And I'm like, that's true. And my son was probably 8 before I read one. It's like
that is a very good point. Yeah, that is a very good point. And a lot of the parenting books, interestingly, are wonderful. So I'm going to say something that's critical of parenting books, but I don't actually mean it as like a overall thing. But a lot of parenting books are with one specific model of parenting in mind. So like you will read a book on conscious parenting or positive parenting. And the problem that can be there is that it sounds great, right? Positive parenting sounds fabulous. Like I want to be a positive parent. I want to be a conscious parent. Let me tell you something. In the middle of a tantrum with a 3-year-old, I forget. I totally forget. And it's just one model that one person puts together, and we can use it to weaponize it against ourselves.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, oh, I wasn't able to get on the level of my kid and help them express it. That's okay. This was one moment in your kid's life and you were standing in the Target losing your shit. It's totally fine. Like it's going to move on. Forgive yourself, forgive your kid, hug him, buy a, treat for everybody involved and move on to the next thing, And so that's the one thing that I think is really there. It's like trust that you don't know. The other thing is not everything works for the same for everybody. Like, so I read so putting babies to sleep, right, is a super controversial parenting thing. But really, it's just like different things for different people, right? Like you've got one kid who will only sleep in a swing, and some other parent will be like, no, you're doing it wrong. You shouldn't allow them to do that. Well, maybe that's just the way the kid sleeps. Maybe the kid has reflux or whatever. You just don't know, right? We don't know. And so I don't know. The more I learn about the different types of parents and the different types of families, the more forgiving and understanding I am for the variety of different ways we do things, which leads me back to like, forgive yourself if you learn something different later and be open to the fact that you didn't necessarily know it, or it wasn't perfect, or maybe your experience is just different. So, I mean, I've never been a surrogate, right? Ever, right? I've never walked that. And so you've had all those millions of experiences in that role that I would never even think to even question or understand. For me to like try and tell you the right way to do it or to share anything other than like interest Seems kind of weird, but we do that with parents all the time, don't we?
Yeah.
Like, it's like, oh, so I live in Miami, Florida. When my daughter was a baby, there was a lady at the park. It was like 85 degrees. There was this sweet, wonderful, charming neighbor of mine that was at the park, and she was very concerned that I did not have a hat, socks, and a blanket on this baby. As I was there, like sweating in that way that you do when you've just grown a human being in your body, and like you're oozing sweat at all times of the day and the tropical humidity. I was thinking to myself, how in the world would I cover this baby right now with like a blanket and a hat? Like, are you kidding me? But whatever.
I hear that a lot, which is funny. And I remember I was pregnant with my son, and it was November, and I was wearing a dress, and it was cold. And it was to other people.
Right.
I had a heater, a built-in heater strapped to me. And somebody at the gas station was like, it's winter, right? And I'm like, do you see the thing? That's
right. Thank you for your feedback.
Thanks.
Thank you for sharing your opinion with me. Right. I didn't know how to say that when I was younger. I did not know how to say that to people. And I'm very, very thankful for the people who were kind to me and didn't do that. I once got just reduced to tears by an old lady in an elevator in a parking garage. And I still think back to the person who showed up and walked me through that. And I'm just really, really thankful, because it's a really hard journey. Being a step parent or parent is a really, really hard journey. And so being kind to each other and being kind to ourselves is so key. Yeah. And it can be so hard. It can be so
Absolutely. Hard. Is there a book that's been instrumental in your personal development journey?
Yes. So I love to read. You said you were a writer. So I'll share the book that I would say that is the one I always recommend to parents, is by Mark Mason. It's called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Beep. And okay, so it's not actually a parenting book, right? It's a book about disengaging and being detached. And I think it's fabulous. Like, it really, really is helpful. It's very entertaining. He records his own audiobook. So if you have Amazon Prime and that, there's that. At the moment, I'm rereading. So this happens to be on my desk. I didn't do this on purpose. So this is The Art of Happiness, which is by the Dalai Lama. And I read it when I was in college, and I'm reading it again. And my teenager is making fun of me. He's like, "What are you doing reading a book about happiness?" But it's helpful. Happiness is a weird thing to strive for, right? When you think about it, like, it feels like it should just be automatic, right? So to think about, why are we happy and why are we not? And then the other one that I think is that also is on my desk, so I'll give you three. This is Radical Acceptance by Tara Brach, and she's a Buddhist, so it's got some spiritualism in it, which may not jibe for everybody, but it's fascinating to have somebody walk you through the process of acceptance, because as a parent, and I guess I'll reference this to, you're about to have a teenager, right? Accepting that the people in our lives are going to be their own individuals is really sometimes hard. It's like, all right, so if you stay up late, you're going to be tired tomorrow. So you need to go to bed, right? Because you're going to be tired. And teenagers are like, I hear you, and I'm not listening, right? And you're like, and then you have to deal with the fact that you have a tired teenager the next day.
Yeah.
And then multiply that out over 100 different decisions, and just being like, hey, I radically accept that I can't physically force you to go to sleep, as much as I would like to come in and lecture you about this for another 30 minutes here. So it's a powerful concept that can be helpful.
Yeah, I love that, and I've read one of the three books. So
the one about happiness,
the first one,
the Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. Do you like it? Do you think it's entertaining?
I listened to it, and it's very funny. And I remember that there was something he said that was really profound, but I don't remember what it was now.
Yeah.
But I'll go back and listen to it again.
I think he does a good job with the audiobook. Like, I've read it, and then I listened to it on a road trip, and I remember laughing is the thing. And I think it's nice because it's not written for parents and it's not written for families. And so I think that makes it more approachable, maybe, is the way it is. It's like, you can really apply it and take the lessons. And it sounds like it's going to be so, like, it's just such a crazy title. Like, it's like, how could you not like this?
Right. Exactly. Where can our listeners find you?
All right. So my name is Amy Stone, right? We've talked about that a couple of times, but you may have forgotten. And the name of my business is Amy Says So, which is a spin on the parental thing because I say so. So Amy Says So is my website, amysaysso.com. That's where I put all of the things I have. I have lots of free resources that I try and offer people. And so if you go to amysaysso.com, there will be a variety of them throwing themselves in your face saying, come have this free thing. And that will put you on my email list where I give you all sorts of wonderful information.
Awesome. I've really enjoyed having you on the episode. And like I said, I would talk to you for another 15 hours. So I might have to have you come back because this 1 hour time limit that I have is just not okay with me.
I've loved our conversation and I loved getting to know you today, and I would be happy to come back at any time.
Awesome. Well, we'll have another episode of Imperfect Momming for you next week. And until then, keep healing. Bye, guys.
Thank you for tuning in to Imperfect Momming. It's time for us to step up and realize that our power is not in trying to shape our children. Our power lies in shaping ourselves into the people we want our children to model themselves after. Don't just do it for your kids. Do it for yourself. When you become a more self-aware, compassionate, and confident person, you and everyone around you benefit. For more information about me and my work, visit alysialyons.com. That's ALYSIALYONS.com. See you next time.